Ambassador, off to you.
Before it's off to me, let's give the General a round of applause. General, we're so thrilled that you're here today, and your comments right now in this interview have really laid a very strong foundation for what's going to be a very dynamic dialogue here this afternoon. We're focused on this question about strategies to improve the Western Hemisphere relationships and also to bolster regional unity. And certainly as part of that, there have been a number of challenges that are before the hemisphere. And I want to just begin with two quotes from the General. She was in Guatemala, as Matt was probing recently, and on that occasion, she tweeted this, quote, "Latin America has suffered 12% of the global cyber attacks. We must implement 21st century tools to prepare, prevent, detect, respond, and recover from these persistent threats," unquote. I wanted to put that out there because just the figure itself is very telling and underscores what you've just shared. Secondly is the fact that you've spoken a great deal to this question of the challenge from China. And a quote that you had, I think, sums it up. Quote, "China is exercising our playbook of being present economically and equipping our hemisphere neighbors militarily." So with that, we're going to get underway with the dialogue. I want to go to former President of Colombia, Iván Duque, first, to get your views on what do you see as the greatest challenges to the Western Hemisphere. And also, thank you this morning for your wonderful announcement and your work on the Amazonas Initiative, which Concordia cherishes very much.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador, and it's such an honor to be in this amazing roundtable with so many distinguished persons. I want more to rely on first the opportunities and then the challenges. And on the opportunities, definitely I'll begin by saying energy and energy supplies and energy security. Latin America can clearly be seen equivalent as the Saudi Arabia of non-conventional renewable energy. The potential that we have in solar and wind is tremendous, and we can become providers of green hydrogen and green ammonia, especially in those places where we have pretty good speed, much better than the northern part of Europe, and we're pretty close to the ocean. So that's one element. The second element is food security. We have a lot of the arable land in the planet. We have places to be well developed in an environmentally sustainable way. And just to give you an idea from my own country, Colombia, Colombia has today almost 8 million hectares devoted for agricultural production, and we have a potential of 22 million hectares, which means there are 14 million hectares to be sustainably developed. The third element, it's about climate change and about climate action. Just the protection of the Amazon. If we do that right, we will allow the Western Hemisphere to clearly complete the national determined contributions towards 2030 and 2050. And we have, after Australia, the second largest coral reef corridor in the planet. So these are very important assets that, well developed with the right funding, can make us part of the solution and allow indigenous and local communities to be pretty much engaged. Now, the challenges, and I'll just concentrate on one, and it's about democracy, and it's about the risks that we have with demagogy, with populism, and with authoritarianism. And just figure this, and I think for this conversation, today, almost 67% of the people in the planet are governed by authoritarian regimes. The sad part of the story is that 10 years ago, it was 48%. So there's a democratic deficit going on. We have the situation in Venezuela, we have the situation in Nicaragua, we have obviously the horrible situation in Cuba, but we're also seeing regimes in Latin America that by extraordinary measures are trying to take full control of the courts, the press, and also in independence of the institutions. And that's a major risk. And we cannot be indifferent to that. And let me just put the question. What happens with democracy is the same thing that happens with health. When we have it, we take it for granted. When we feel that it's threatened, we try to recover it, and maybe it's too late. And we have to say things as they are, and we need multilateral institutions not to shift their eyes to the other side, but what is happening in many countries in Latin America needs to be addressed. And the best way to address it is in evident cases like the one in Venezuela, is we have a war criminal that has to be trialed by the International Criminal Court. We have seen that every single step to loosen the sanctions has been taken by Nicolas Maduro to affect the democratic resistance. And what happens is there are a lot of copycats of that model. And those copycats now are nationalizing and statizing systems of healthcare, pensions, and so other things in their continent. So I think this is the major threat, because without democracy, it's going to be impossible to trigger the confidence, the investment, and the social transformation that the countries need in Latin America.
President Duque, thank you for that response. And I like the fact you not only mentioned the challenges, but you mentioned the opportunities, because, by the way, that's going to be part of our discussion as well, but you're ahead of us on that one. Now it gives me great pleasure to go to Minister Gabriela Sommerfeld, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of the Republic of Ecuador. And Madam, the floor is yours, and I understand you'll speak in Spanish for those who need translation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ambassador. Thank you all for being here today.
Gracias.
I'm very honored to be invited and talk for Ecuador in this panel. And I rather prefer to speak in Spanish, so I can use all the wording that it's very important in order I can explain a little bit better what happens in Ecuador right now. Cuando nosotros hablamos de que el
When
día
we
de hoy
speak about the
existen
fact that today there
varios
are
riesgos
several risks
en nuestra región
in our
para la
region
integración, para
to
la
the
cooperación.
integration
El primer riesgo y
and the
mayor riesgo
cooperation.
que ha paralizado nuestros
The
países y ha
largest
llegado a
or worst that
paralizar
has
nuestro país
paralyzed our
es el
countries
crimen organizado transnacional. El crimen
transnational
organizado transnacional
organized
que ha
crime
obligado a que exista
that
una migración
has
masiva
led
y que la violencia
to
que puedan
this
encontrar
massive
los ciudadanos, en este
migration,
caso del Ecuador,
and that
sea mucho
violence
mayor
that the
a la
citizens can
violencia que
find
encuentran dentro
in
del
this case in
país
Ecuador
por falta de
is
oportunidades
even
en
worse
trabajo, por falta de
than what they
oportunidades
find in their
en
country,
en
because
estudios,
there's lack of
y esto se ha
work
dado por,
opportunities, lack
lo que el día de
of
hoy tiene
education.
controlada la economía de muchos
And
de nuestros
this
países
has
de
happened
Latinoamérica, que es el narcotráfico.
because
Y
of
contra el
what has
narcotráfico,
controlled the economy of many of our
varios,
countries is
negocios ilícitos, como
drug
es la
trafficking,
minería ilegal,
as
el
well
tráfico
as
de personas,
illegal
el tráfico de
mining,
niños, el
human
lavado de dinero.
trafficking,
Llegó hasta el
children
punto, en el
trafficking,
mes de
money
diciembre nosotros
laundering.
teníamos
So much
207
so that in
crímenes
December we
violentos
had
por semana.
207 violent
De los
crimes
peores índices del
per
mundo.
week,
Y en
one
el
of
mes
the
de
worst
enero,
indexes in the
el
world.
presidente Noboa
And in
decidió
January, President
publicar dos
Noboa
decretos,
decided to
dos decretos que han
issue
marcado el
two
antes y el después de
decrees
nuestro país.
that
Dos
have
decretos que
set like
declaran
the
un
before
régimen de
and after
excepción,
of
un
the
estado de
country,
excepción. Y por
declaring
otro
a
lado,
state of
declara un
exception,
conflicto
and on the
armado
other hand,
interno.
an internal
Identifica
armed
22
conflict.
grupos terroristas,
Identified
todos ligados al
22 terrorist
narcotráfico,
groups,
decide
all of them
declarar la
linked
guerra
to drug
adentro. Y eso
trafficking, and
significa guerra en
declared the
todos sus
war
términos.
in the country,
Se combate la
meaning
corrupción,
in all
se
senses
combate al
to fight
terrorismo,
against
y se
corruption,
combate a
against
todos los negocios
terrorism,
ilícitos.
and
Esto
every
obliga también a que las
illicit
Fuerzas Armadas tomen un
businesses or
nuevo rol,
dealings,
porque la guerra
thus
ya no
leading
está
the
fuera de las
armed
fronteras,
forces
sino
to
dentro de
play
nuestro
a new
país.
role, because the
40,000
war is
hombres
now in
altamente
our
armados
country.
están identificados dentro
40,000
de estos
men that are highly armed are identified in these terrorist groups. We also have in the armed forces 40,000 officers, but they're all not as well armed as the terrorists. Undoubtedly, one of the worst challenges we have is that international cooperation comes at the right point. The time is today when we have declared a war against what has paralyzed many countries in Latin America. And when I say paralyzed, it's because we don't get investment, because many companies have been closed. I say that more than 40,000 small and medium-sized companies have been closed, and micro firms have closed, those that deliver 70% of the work throughout the world, because they couldn't pay the so-called vaccine or tolls that are charged by transnational organized crime. That's it, a fee to allow them to continue working. There is a multinational corporation that, as part of its annual budget, they had to include an item to pay those fees for the distribution channel, because it was worse not to incur in that cost than to lose the distribution channel, and that led to the increase of migration. Today, more than 140 countries welcomed the actions undertaken by President Noboa, who I am represented at this table, to fight against organized international crime. With 20 of them, we have been working in cooperation agreements to fight against this cancer that had halted our economy, as well as the hopes of the Ecuadorians. But it is very important to mention that the issues that have made a victim of Ecuador were not caused by Ecuador. We don't produce narcotics or drugs. However, 50% of the coke bought by the world, the whole world, goes through our country. We are not consumers either. The largest consumers are in other continents too. And that is why we have to solve this problem in a cooperative way at international level, thus fighting against insecurity, migration, return the confidence or trust to investors, so as to have more development and better opportunities for the people in all countries. I wanted to mention that case this case of Ecuador, which is has been publicized in the media. But also I would like to mention something that happened 15 days ago, when we decided to fight against this crime, international crime. We said at every level. However, they started saying that Ecuador had infringed international conventions when we tried to catch one of the worst criminals that had been inside an embassy. And we have to say that there are countries that, through their embassies, were covering up for individuals that are attack or attempt against the security of countries, because they are covering for criminals, rendering asylum to them. This is another very important issue that we have to consider, because this has happened throughout the world. The conventions that we are signatories to, do they respond to the realities of today's world as to organized crime? And all the industries or businesses around it? These conventions were created 50, 70 years ago, and I think that they don't according to today's reality. Thank you very much.
And you really did exactly what we wanted you to do, because we wanted you to talk specifically about what's happening in Ecuador and placing it in the broader context. And you have certainly done that. And we're going to come back to you on some of the concrete steps that can be taken to deal with the challenges you put forward. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Terrance Drew. And if I may say, I did enjoy in reading your bio because you're known in this case as Caring Dr. Drew. You have a medical background and a very interesting perspective, I think, on your not only life, but also your role and responsibility. We'd really welcome hearing your view, especially in the Caribbean. What do you see as the biggest threats? And let me pick up President Duque's term, also the opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me say good afternoon to all, and it's a pleasure, of course, being here. I want to also acknowledge all of the other persons who are around this table. Let me start out by, of course, expressing thanks to the Southern Command. I see that the General is here to really support what she's saying. Just recently, Southern Command joined with some countries of the OECS, St. Kitts Nevis, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and also Taiwan to do a medical mission throughout the islands. And I think that was the first one, and I'm happy that something like that was done. So thank you very much. Let me get into it, that the Caribbean, as you would recognize, to a great extent, is more water than land. I say that because I think in that lies many opportunities, but also it also creates some strategic difficulties in terms of how do you protect your countries. For example, St. Kitts and Nevis has about 100 times more water space than land space. And in that, it's challenging to protect the country. And therefore, it is open for drug trafficking, fundamentally from the southern part of the Americas. And with that comes the guns and so forth. And so when we speak of challenges that we are facing, this is one of the major challenges that the Caribbean is facing, drug trafficking, and with that, the guns, and the guns that lead to a lot of violence within our region. We call this also a multi-crisis or poly-crisis. That's one of them, the security issues. And there are other opportunities that I can explain that we can exploit within that. But let me go to another one. The other one is climate change. And for many, climate change has become a cliche. And in some parts, and we have to be frank, even in the United States, there are those who deny climate change. Climate change for us in the Caribbean is real. We suffer disproportionately compared to other countries that produce more of the carbon dioxide. We are this year going to suffer more hurricanes than last year. Are we already seeing the rising sea levels that are destroying our beaches, which are really part of our tourism attraction, which really is the fundamental pillar of many of our economies? We're already seeing the seaweed or sargassum coming from south because of rising sea temperatures, really washing up on our shores and destroying the beauty of our beaches. I will speak about a resort called Koi Resort in St. Kitts and Nevis that today has no beach. And it has no beach because of sea level rising. And so they have to downgrade from a resort with a beach to just a resort. And that affects their charges and the number of jobs, of course, that would spin off from that. With the hurricanes, one hurricane can wipe out the whole GDP of St. Kitts and Nevis, one, Category 5. And we are facing about 7 to 9 Category 5s this year. And if one hits us, we are set back a decade to do 2 decades of development. So it is very real and serious. Today, St. Kitts and Nevis is a water deficient country. We used to be a water sufficient country, but because of climate change, we don't have enough water. So now we have to ration the water. It's affecting agriculture, less food production. We have to now order more food from outside and importing a lot of the inflation that you are seeing here in North America and other countries. This is the poly crisis. And then on top of that, we are considered a high-income country because we are small in one sense. And so our income, they calculate it as a ratio. And as a result of that, we are shut out from having financing or be able to have loans at concessionary rates and so forth, which we need just for the adaptation of climate change alone. Just to give our people water, we now have to invest about 30 plus million US dollars. And our GDP is just about 3 billion EC dollars, which is just about 1.3 billion US dollars. That is water. To shift the electricity to help to cut cost to renewable, that is costing us a good percentage already of our GDP. Why do I say that? Because we think that this is part of our crisis. How can you judge us as a high-income country when our economy is so small based on our size? It does not give us the critical mass to be able to invest in the infrastructure and other areas that are necessary just to adapt to climate change. So our GDP, or our annual budget, about 50% of it is already being used just to adapt to climate change, which means that other 50%, which used to be used for continued development or even sustainability, we no longer have access to that. And then we can't approach financial institutions and say, can we have loan at concessionary rates? And then we are shut out from funding from other agencies, whether they are from other countries or international agencies. So the situation is quite challenging. And I say that to all of us, that the poly crisis that we are facing, if we are not supported, this can really help add to our decline as a country. And when a country starts its economic decline, if not assisted by like-minded countries that are, of course, based on the principles of democracy, which we are based on, others will see this as a vulnerability and seek to intrude, as was mentioned by the general. However, St. Kitts and Nevis is committed strongly to the principles of democracy. And while we are enemies of none, our principles are we tend to form diplomatic relations with countries that are like-minded. And the like-minded countries must therefore form bonds and allow the results of those bonds to be tangible, to make sense, so that people can say that democracy does make sense. At the end of the day, and it was referred that I'm a medical doctor, we know and we study the hierarchy of needs. And the first need is your basic needs. And if democracy for some is not offering that, then people start to think differently. However, this is where I think the opportunities are. With all of that, I still think that there's great hope and there's solution. Because even though we are small as we are, we came up with a concept called sustainable island state, which is a concept, not only a concept, but a tangible plan, a real plan of how we can approach the scourge of climate change, maintain our continued development, and make sure that our democracy is not invaded by those who don't believe in democracy. And so we are not looking for any pity on these matters. We are looking for real partnerships. And these partnerships can be had from like-minded countries and put in place real plans that can deal with the poly crisis that we are dealing with. So at the end of the day, I will say that with all these issues, there are great opportunities, and St. Kitts and Nevis stands or sits at the table as one who is ready to contribute to solutions and not dwell on all of the problems alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your great passion and your focus on the issue of climate change. Now it gives me great pleasure. Let's hear from His Excellency Robert Persaud, who is the Foreign Secretary and High Representative on UN Security Council Affairs for the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And Guyana had special reference, of course, with Concordia and former Prime Minister Duque and Concordia, of course, because of the actual Amazonas program. So congratulations on that. We look forward to getting your perspective on what you see as the greatest threats. We know Venezuela has given you challenges. we also know that, speaking of opportunities, you have great opportunities given your energy wealth. What's your view on this question?
Thank you very much, and let me express how happy I am to be part of this esteemed panel. And again, good afternoon to all those who've taken time off to participate. There are many challenges our hemisphere or region face, and those, some of which were eloquently described and pointed to by previous speakers. But I want to reiterate a few of those and then bring that back into both within the region and the national context. The first of which is looking at the issues of our energy and food insecurity, the issue that we face in terms of climate crisis, transnational crime, drug trafficking, the migrant crisis that is now upon us within the region, lack of development funding and access to funding by many countries, the issue also of debt, managing debt. And those are some of the key and prominent issues that affect many countries within the hemisphere. And it is important that we identify, as we are seeking to do here today, a concerted, a collaborative, and even a regional and a hemispheric approach in dealing with some of these challenges, some of these difficulties that affect our countries. And already work has started in this direction, and several which have been alluded to. But I want to talk about what we have already on the table, the efforts and the initiatives that are on the table, and how it is that we can build upon those. Within the CARICOM, the Caribbean Community context, we have prioritized some of these challenges for immediate action. Take, for instance, the issue of food insecurity. We've developed a plan, a 25 by 25 plan, which is simple. By the year 2025, we must reduce our food import bill. Right now, the region imports close to between 5 and 6 billion US dollars annually in food that it can produce. And we saw with the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, followed by the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the disruption that was caused and totally exposed the CARICOM region as it did in other parts of the world. And that itself motivated us to come up with innovative solutions, and that was one. The United States, too, has been stepping forward, and we have the PAC 2030 initiative being led by Vice President Harris. Again, it offers some initiatives and some solution in the issues of climate, dealing with security, dealing with energy, and also looking at some of the developmental challenges that have been affecting us and how it is that we can work as a hemisphere together. So we have that too on the table. In terms of addressing the security challenges, we have the Caribbean Basin Initiative, security and the great work and the sustained work too of Southern Command, as General Richardson has pointed to some of those issues, and we're very grateful as a region, and particularly Guyana, for the support and the collaboration we've had from Southern Command in that area. And so there are a number of these initiatives that are here which we can build upon. The issue of climate for us also presents an opportunity, as with food, as I pointed out to. Take, for instance, we have determined that Guyana can be a model within our low-carbon development strategy, whereby, given our vast arable land, fresh water, we can become a solution in dealing with the food insecurity of the region, and we've started that program already. On energy, not only in the area of our great potential in hydrocarbons, oil and gas, we can also become a solution to the regions and the hemisphere energy insecurity, but also in renewables. In terms of dealing with the climate crisis too, we have our rainforest, which is intact, the size of England and Scotland combined. And what we have been, our contribution in terms of mitigation globally, and what we are doing as part of the Amazonia project, as well as part of the rainforest in terms of the Tri-Basin Initiative that we've embarked upon, because we know that greenhouse gas emission, 1/5 of it comes from deforestation and land degradation. And therein we've seen ourselves as presenting a solution, and we've sought to develop a collaborative approach within the hemisphere, within the region, Guyana, we're strategically placed because we are also part of mainland continent, South America, but we're also part of the Caribbean community, consisting mainly of islands within the Caribbean Sea, and which was formerly the West Indies as such. And with our strategic position, we can offer that type of collaboration and that type of networking. But another challenge too, and that was alluded to by former President Duque as well as General Richardson, is what we see as democratic backsliding. And we need to arrest that, and arrest that very early, because if that trend continues, and we see there's a global trend, it can add and compound to the already existing challenges that are affecting countries and affecting our region. And we need, as a hemisphere, and to ensure that our institutions take note of that. And I refer to the OAS, to CELAC, to UNISOR, to Caribbean Community. All institutions must see this as a matter of urgent action, as one in which that we must reinforce and take the necessary steps in terms of addressing and maintaining democratic principle. And I want to end in another challenge too, particularly the issue of Venezuela and Haiti. And they're two different sets of challenges. And the aggression that has been recently pumped up by the Maduro regime can affect and can harm our hemisphere as being a zone of peace. And this must cause all of us not only to be alarmed, but also to take the necessary action in this regard in arresting and ensuring that the motives and even the action. Just recently, the Caracas put into place what it calls the organic law, which basically annexes 2/3 of Guyana. And he's certainly be playing by the Russian playbook in many regards of what is taking place. And this certainly is an issue that we must not take lightly, because it would have, if he continues along this path, severe repercussion. And again, it requires hemispheric sustained attention and action. And Haiti, we must not forget Haiti. We know in our multipolar world, there are many crises. We know we have, in terms of what's Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Israel-Gaza war. Now we have the Israel-Iran situation that we have to deal with, and certainly takes the gaze and the eye of the international community away. But Haiti itself, too, requires that type of sustained action. Recently, we've seen some developments by the international community in addressing some of those immediate problems, but I want to flag that in terms of us not losing sight of those. But there are many opportunities, some of which I've alluded to, but certainly the time for action, the time for urgency in regional collaboration and hemispheric cooperation is now, if we are going to successfully address the challenges, but certainly maximize the opportunities that lie within those as we seek to maintain prosperity and peace and stability within our hemisphere and region.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And also, thank you very much for your role as the head of CARICOM. And I understand that will be passed the leadership role to St. Kitts and Nevis in 2025. And it was very significant you raised the Organization of American States, because we are going there next to the Secretary General, Luis Almagro. We'd like very much to get your view on what can the OAS, what role does the OAS have here in terms of the challenges as well as bringing regional unity? What are the concrete steps that the OAS has been taking or could be taking?
Thank you, and sorry to all of you there. I'm giving my back to you. This dialogue about the strategies to improve the Western Hemisphere relationships is basically what the organization has been dealing with, being the oldest regional organization in the world, the oldest multilateral organization in the world since 1889. They're in that beautiful building since 1910. And we feel that this moment is very necessary to go back to the basics. And we are very far from the basics, and that means what it was said, democracy matters. Democracy is a strong point here, and if we see this region, I said today, the better the democracy works and the democratic institutions work, the better the level of development in the region, the better the level of security, and the better the level of access to rights and equity. So the more democratic we are, the better are our conditions for development. And if you see the dictatorships in the region are complete failures, social failures, migration failures, they are humanitarian crisis, migration crisis, they have the whole package. So we need definitely to address the basics, and democracy is a point one. Second one is something that we definitely need, and the crisis that we have had in the past week, it is clear that we need more diplomacy and more dialogue. It is very necessary. If you have a disagreement related to the application of a convention, there are many ways that you can fix that, and you don't start by the first. The first move cannot be the last and the more dramatic one. We definitely need to keep building common interests. We feel that sometimes this relation should be in the region we practically don't have physical distance, but we need to have a better relation, mind to mind and heart to heart, for better understanding of everybody. That is crucial, and that is what it can bring a true partnership in the region. That is what we definitely need. We need that done from the governments, we need that done from the private sector, the civil society, from everybody. We need our developed partners to carry us, Latin American and Caribbeans, because if not, we have lost the first industrial revolution, we have lost the second one, the third one, the fourth one. I mean, the developed partners that we have shouldn't allow us to lose the next one and the next one, especially in this digital area. So we need a stronger partnership in that sense. We need to build something related to innovation, to technology that is completely different, but we need to be carried out from where we are starting and from what we are dealing with. It's practically impossible for us to catch up and to close the gap. That is extremely necessary. We need something that is extremely relevant and is the basic of the basic of the basics. We need to eradicate poverty. We have rich countries with poor people. That it cannot be, and we need to have a master plan in the region to eradicate poverty, to eradicate inequality. That is, it is an imperative. And of course, we need better conditions to build security, and that requires also stronger partnerships. It's impossible for one country to fix security. It is impossible. It definitely needs partners. Without that, will never work. We value what countries are doing, trying to fix these things, but by themselves it cannot be. It will never be, because at least you produce the cockroach effect. I mean, you smash them here and they spread all about the region. So you have to concentrate efforts from everywhere in order to. And this, and of course, some other kind of security that we've proved that we don't have: food security and health security. So it can go further, but I think we are in a hurry.
I think you've covered the waterfront in terms of the challenges, but thank you for that. It gives me pleasure to introduce the Honorable Victor Bisonó, who is the Minister of Industry, Commerce, and SMEs. And before I pass it to you, I wanted to give a data point, 2 data points. The Dominican Republic, you'll be having your elections in May, I believe. It's May 19. And secondly, it'd be interesting to hear the perspective, the issues in the country. But also the IMF cited the Dominican Republic, by the way, as leading in economic growth with a very strong 5.4%. That data just came out a couple days ago. So congratulations to you. You're the leader of the Hemisphere, as I understand it, according to the IMF. So please, Minister, over to you. We'd like to get your perspective before we hear from the Americans here.
Muchísimas gracias. Para mí un placer, un lujo poder
Thank you
estar
very much.
compartiendo
For
con
me,
esta
it's a
mesa de trabajo
pleasure
con
to share with this public and with this working table. Of course, I would like to see things in a very optimistic way. We are concerned and we can take care of it. In a hemisphere that sometimes Latin American stands for itself, but we decide to see it together, and especially because it has a younger population with more resources, and in front of all these problems, we have a more peace. We don't have a high-intensity war. And in this way, we are closer to the United States in this case. So we know our challenges, cybersecurity, populism, the risk of democracy, climate change, and I also would add phytosanitary themes, the migration problems, which are very important for us, for some countries more than others, and I include the Dominican Republic in this area as well. And what we can see in the world, and that you made reference to, is what has happened in the Dominican Republic. We all administered the pandemic for 3 years ago, and we depended many imports from commodities, the variables and increases in raw materials, especially with oil. And in our case, with those things that relate to the climate, cyclones in Dominican Republic, we have had 2 tropical storms. However, in Dominican Republic, under the leadership of a president that believes in the separation of powers, that we have the struggle against the traffic of drugs as a corridor in Latin America in the last 20 years or so, that we were able to increase our renewable energy, clean energy as well, that we have been able to keep peace and prosperity. And this reflects in higher foreign investment, in working more with quality and giving importance to gender equality in all sectors. Well, then the Financial Times speak about Dominican Republic, and the IMF as well said that we are going to increase by 5.4%, or the World Bank, as many other international or private organizations. What I want to say is that perhaps we are at the proper time to continue talking, as the General said, in terms of democracy. That is to say that we cannot make things together, that we need to ally ourselves, and we work with Panama and Costa Rica as a democracy alliance, and Ecuador as well, and we want to give the example to the Prosperity Alliance that Biden has proposed. But I want to conclude this first part by congratulating the members of the executive power in the United States who have understood the importance of the hemisphere, that they can see in a practical way the things that we can do together in a fast and efficiently as well, in order to go ahead the problems that we have to face. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Well, now let's go to Chris Ruddy, who is the CEO of Newsmax. We're going to go to you first, and then to Senator Dodd, and back to General Richardson. But from your perspective, your media, you do write a lot about the issue of China. And by the way, in the United States, there's been a type of bipartisanship on this issue, a very strong one, but one that's been very concerned about what China has been doing in the hemisphere. Could you speak to that issue and other issues that you might see as the challenge and threat for the hemisphere. You have to put,
Okay, perfect. I don't claim to be an expert on Latin America, but I have certainly been in the region. I was just down in Central America and South America in January. We certainly have covered it for a number of years. I've done business down there. I think as a global perspective, I see that there's a struggle all across the world for dominance or influence. We see it in Europe with Ukraine, Russia's unprovoked war on Ukraine, which Putin has made clear is an effort for dominance over Europe. We're seeing it in China, where they're clearly trying to exercise dominance in the sea lanes, proving that they control Taiwan. We don't know exactly where that's going. In the Middle East, there's several players with hegemonic interests. Latin America, I think, has been is a new key playground for all the different players. The United States, for a long time, I think, has been missing an action as a force for positive and good. I think we sometimes appear more of dilettantes coming in with ideas and policies and then retreating, changes in administrations. China seems to be filling the vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. We saw in Africa, China has come in very strongly. I think they've been more sophisticated in their approach in Latin America. I spoke to a head of state in South America in January, and we were talking, I raised the issue of the problem of China. And he corrected me and he said, it's your problem, it's not ours. Meaning they like the fact that China's coming into their country. They like the investment that China's making. They're not upset about it. With the US, we see our interests receding and we see security threats. The general mentioned that China's moving in with oftentimes state-owned businesses. I'm assuming that comes with state-owned policies or state-interested policies. And that's a real threat directly, I think, to our security interests. I think about the Panama Canal, for instance. What happens if we did have a crisis in Taiwan? Can we guarantee the security of the canal with so much Chinese interest involved in the canal, the bridge over the canal, many state-owned businesses now in Panama? President Duque mentioned the democracy deficit. I think that's a serious plays into the influence that various countries and players can make. I think the less likely you have democracy, the more likely you'll have some third party that can be influential over the dictatorships in the region. I think it was true when I studied at the London School of Economics. Samuel Huntington was the guy everybody talked about in building stable democracies, and I think it's what he wrote in 50, 60 years ago is still true today, which is that a strong middle class drives a democracy. Strong economic foundations drive democracy. And we can almost draw a direct line and correlation with income disparities through Latin America and the political volatility, Haiti being, I think, the prime example right now. So I think the U.S., which has relied really on a dollar diplomacy policy for 100 years in Central and South America, should be focused on maybe a more two-pronged approach where we do private business, but we're also trying to support policies that build strong economic foundations across the region. And for a long time, we always said America's backyard was Latin America. It's really our front yard. It's really the stepping stone to the rest of the world. We've taken it for granted, and I think we should have renewed focus on it.
Thank you very much for those comments, and I couldn't agree more. It is the front yard. Now, let me go to Senator Dodd, who is the Special Presidential Advisor for the Americas, but everyone also knows you. You had a 30-some year in the Senate and on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and, I mean, you know the whole region very, very well. You were in the Peace Corps. Really would like you to step back. You've heard a number of the comments. You especially, you were involved with the Summit of the Americas, and there was, in fact, the Americas Partnership set up. Where are we now with this? Is this a solution for going forward? Is this going to be addressing some of the challenges that you've heard from our colleagues here at the table? And welcome to you. We're delighted that you're here.
There it is. Well, thank you, Paula, because we've known each other a long time and all of this. And so after that introduction, I was elected to Congress when Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States. A little older here, maybe, than some of the people who have been around for a while, and so all of these matters. So first of all, to Concordia, thanks for the invitation to be with you today and to participate in this. And I love the comments. I know an awful lot of the people gathered on this gathering here this afternoon and have great respect for many of them. President Duque and I have known each other a long time. Mr. Minister, you and I know each other. Luis, going down the table. So Laura, I'm a huge fan of. Laura will be wrapping up her service, and I can't tell you, as someone who's spent a lot of time in the region, we have been so blessed in the Americas to have you the head of Southcom. So thank you for that, and great luck to you in your work coming up. The Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis said one of his last comments is the word I'd like to pick up on, and the word was partnership, and I thank you, Paula, for referencing that. This is an opportunity. I'm tempted. I don't disagree with any of the concerns. I think all of them have great legitimacy, and they're not new concerns. Some are more important today than others, but there's no end to that list of the concerns we have. What we're desperately in need of is some solutions that might work. And every single issue you raise here, whether it's climate change or it's immigration or it's healthcare policy, whatever it is, there's not a single nation that I know of, and certainly none in the Americas, in our hemisphere, that can solve any of those problems on their own. None. So in any solutions we talk about, we must begin with the notion of cooperation. How do we form these partnerships? Franklin Roosevelt had a great program in the Good Neighbor Policy, and President Kennedy with the Alliance for Progress and so forth. But in almost all those instances, it was the United States sort of setting the agenda here. And while there were great intentions and so forth in many, many cases, it lacked the collaboration that is necessary. What we're talking about, what was announced in the summit in Los Angeles, is a very important decision that President Biden made. And that was to talk about how we do this differently, if we could. And that is, of course, the Partnership for Economic Prosperity in our hemisphere. I think too often we dwell on the things that are wrong and not going well, and I appreciate Mr. President, talking about the positive things, but I want to dwell on those for a minute. We're the smallest hemisphere. We're 1/10 of the world's population in our Americas, all right? 33% of the food the world eats every day comes from our Americas. About half the fresh water in the world is in our Americas. You have incredible resources and natural resources and mineral resources and agricultural resources. It's a remarkably rich, if you will, area running from the Yukon to Ushuaia. And too often I don't think we take stock of the assets we have. Talented, some of the great universities in the world are located in this hemisphere. The human resources are talented as well. And we need to remind each other of that as we go forward and look to how we can do a better job at this. What the President has put forward, and frankly, I'm delighted to tell you, it's working here. We already have had 12 countries decided they would like to be a part of this America's partnership. 7 other countries have indicated they would like to join. We picked out the original 12 countries because they had free trade agreements, they had other things they had done, and so they already had some experience in all of this. But the reaction has been extremely positive across the hemisphere. And the meetings have already occurred on the 3 tracks: the political track with the State Department and the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, with the trade policy, and well as the finance policies. All of those are already moving and working. In fact, we've already put together $3 billion for programs affecting infrastructure in the Americas as a result of the IDB stepping up at the plate, along with the DFC in the United States. So there's actually money available today to start doing some of the things that need to get done. So the whole idea is, how do we make ourselves more prosperous? How do we also understand that we need regional economic integration, because no country can do it alone, despite the fact you've identified all of the problems, but almost every country can cite one of them as saying a problem they have. What the hell are we doing about it, in a sense? I finally got an American president, and I've served with 7 of them over the years. And so I admire many of them and agreed with many of them on many things. But I finally got someone who's offered an idea of a solution, and that is to bring people together of like-minded principles. So a value system here that believes in democracy And he believes very strongly that we can be the most prosperous, the most secure, and the most democratic hemisphere on this planet. And we better start thinking about how to do that, in my view, rather than just citing the litany of all the things that go wrong. So we need to cite them, and I get that. But if we don't act soon, I'm a great believer in what I call my windows open and windows close. And I went through that for almost 40 years in the United States Congress, when Jefferson and I worked together back in the day. And if you don't move when the windows open, they close faster than they open. We've got an open window opportunity right now, in my view. But it will close so fast you won't believe it, how fast it can happen. And then we're struggling to deal with each of these individual problems, either unilaterally or in some small coalitions. So there's an opportunity in front of us now. And you've got talented people at this table, and others as well, who care about not only their own countries, but also the generations to come, and they care about each other. We need more trust between our countries. I talk about this all the time, but we're a nation, we're a hemisphere of a lot of division. We spend a lot of time attacking each other. It's the 21st century. We're one quarter already almost done with it, and we're almost getting near the half part of the 21st century. We're thinking like we're in the mid part of the 20th century in terms of how we're addressing issues. You could blindfold and just hear the arguments made over the past decades, and they wouldn't be much different than what we're hearing today, in a sense. So do we have new ideas? Can we work together? Can we decide that partnerships really matter in terms of bringing our resources together? So I'm very excited. I won't bore you with all the details of where things are, but it's very fair. There's an America's Act program that's been introduced in the Congress of the United States. And believe me when I tell you, anything that's bicameral or bipartisan today is a miracle in the United States Congress, given how they'll have lovely sit-ins with each other. But you have Bill Cassidy, the Republican from Louisiana, Michael Bennet from Colorado, the Democrat. You have Congresswoman Salazar in the House of Representatives, and Alejandro Espaillat from the Dominican, Adriano from the Dominican Republic. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, on a bicameral basis have introduced which codifies the President's proposal on the partnership for the Americas here, with all the specific aspects of it. Look, I'm not going to suggest you it's a slam dunk in this room today, but I will tell you it has the possibility of working. But we need people to get together and share those value systems. And those who do, we ought to let move in and be part of our group, in a sense. And I think if we demonstrate that democracy, success, prosperity can actually work. I had dinner last night with a large group of private business people here in Miami, every one of whom was from somewhere in Latin America, who tried to make their businesses work there, ended up coming back here. They would love to go back and develop in the country and be part of an evangelistic approach of convincing other financial interests why this makes sense. We take too much time, I think, and I say this politely, but we take too much time talking about what's wrong about everything. Who in their right mind would want to go someplace that everybody talks about how bad it is, in a sense? We've got a tremendous opportunity to market what our hemisphere provides. And the sooner we get about doing it, the better off we're all going to be.
Senator, thank you for that. Senator, by the way, that's what Concordia is all about, a call to action. So you've just given the call to action and the challenge there for all of us to be pairing up and being supportive from the public sector and the private sector in terms of the partnership.
Well,
so that's
right.
fantastic.
You can't be for job creation and against private sector investment. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
And so the sooner we start promoting private sector investment, we can make a huge difference in these partnerships.
Thank you for that. General, let's go to you now. We started with you in the interview, and you've heard the different perspectives, and we want to hear your perspective. And then, by the way, after you give it, we're still going to have a rapid round, and then we're going to have a poll before we close. But we'd love to hear your reactions to what you've heard.
So absolutely a call to action, and I'm so glad that Senator Dodd said that. A lot of comments here, and when you put them all together, it's a call to action because the opportunity will close. The opportunities are there, and about 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about this region, this hemisphere, our shared neighborhood. We're all in the same hemisphere living together, and a lot of talk about this region being able to feed and fuel the world. I say again, to feed and fuel the world. And so as I go and I visit migration shelters, I visit migrants and their families, and I ask them, and last week I met with a family in Guatemala. I asked them, where are you going? Why are you leaving? Why don't you stay here? They say they're all going to find the American dream. They all want to have a house. They want to be safe. They want to have health care. They want to be able to get food. So how do we realize and how do we help this region achieve the potential and make the American dream the America's dream? How do we do that? How do we do that with economic investment? And Senator Dodd just talked about APEP, just talked about the Americas Act. You know, you could liken that to the Monroe Doctrine, which the name of the Monroe Doctrine in 1948 was the Economic Recovery Act. And it was to war-torn Europe. And so what you have essentially in some of these cases with COVID, with transnational criminal organizations, you have this to where you need economic infusion and you need changes that are instrumental and across the entire hemisphere. And so I would say that some of these things that have been introduced are ways to get after that, to help this region realize that potential. I mean, I go back to the potential. You could just rattle off the list. It's huge. I mean, the agriculture, over 50% of the soybean is from this region, over 30% of the sugar and the corn. You have the Amazon, the lungs of the world. 31% of the world's fresh water, 60% of the world's lithium comes from this region. Gold, copper, heavy crude, light sweet crude, feed and fuel the world. It's here. Everything is here in the region. So how do we get the economic stability, the economic infusion, and economic security? I firmly become to believe that economic security is national security. And so I'll stop with my comments there because I think we can attain this potential and we can achieve it with this group here and with all of you that are listening in to Concordia.
Thank you for that. Senator, you wanted to make the quick comment? Again, I'm going to let you because then we're going to do a rapid fire before we do the poll.
We make Laura Richardson stay.
Okay. So
That's my motion.
That's part of a call to action here, okay? All right. I'd like to go around very rapidly, and I'm going to start on this end, and then we're going to end over there. And forgive me, we're going to skip you, General and Senator. We're going to skip you, and we're going to skip you and I, Matt. Chris, what do you think is the most important step forward? Just a very,
Well,
one
I'm
or
not sure
two
there's a
words.
single most, but I'm seeing here that there's similar comments made. One is about economic issues and the importance of a real strong and pro-economic policy. Second, security seems to be coming up occasionally. Climate change issues seem to be, I would say, the third, those three issues. And democracy is tied in, I think, to all of them. So,
Okay.
and I think it's been very helpful. I think there's more agreement than disagreement, which is really good. But then in the end of the day, as the senator said, how much are we actually cooperating and get anything done?
Well, after that very strong appeal, we're going to charge forward. Please,
I would want us
Minister
to...
Persaud.
Yes, thank you. I would want us to reinforce the subsidiarity model, whereby the institutions that are closest to the countries and to the challenges, that we reinforce those. A simple example, take for instance with CARICOM, we have a regional security system, the RSS, but that is underfunded, under-resourced, and cannot address some of those issues, and will allow us to tackle not only security, but if we use that model in other areas. And finally, I like the passion of Senator Dodd and certainly the direction of the current administration. But for too long, the U.S. has zoned out on us of this hemisphere. And I think it's important that it remains because it must recognize also its ability to mobilize and provide leadership in terms of reinforcing all the things that we want.
Got that message. Minister, please, and rapid fire through here.
Thank you very much. Well, firstly, Tenemos que defender la democracia.
We have to defend democracy and the rule of law. That is the objective, the ultimate objective we have heard from everyone. We have to defend democracy that is in crisis. Second, regional integration through commercial cooperation, security cooperation. Third, set common goals, work in an articulate manner. And I'm going to give a practical objective. Ecuador's issue led the Andean community to get together, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, to draw an action plan for the region to fight the problem that we have in Ecuador, but it's not only the Ecuador, but the whole region.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Prime Minister.
Yes,
please.
thank you very much. Let me point out that I continue to say that partnerships can resolve many of the issues that we have, and I continue to push that forward. In the Caribbean, we have the OECS, and the minister from Guyana spoke about RSS, for which I'm the chairman. And I'm very aware of all the issues that are there, but I still see great opportunities in these challenges. One of the things I would like to put forward, for example, is the issue of energy. I think that resolving a lot of the energy issues in this part of the world, especially taking advantage of our renewable energy sources, such as St. Kitts Nevis, is quite small, but has a very large geothermal opportunity. That in itself can help to resolve a lot of the economic issues and help the region as a whole as it can export that energy. So I would like to say that this is not the time to wallow in all of the challenges alone and to feel sorry or pity for those who are suffering most, but this gives us the opportunity really to form partnerships, and there lies the hope.
Thank you so much for that. All right, and over to President Duque, please.
Well, I think a lot of important things have been said, and maybe summarizing in three critical points, I want to go back to something that maybe we haven't mentioned it with so much loudness, and it's trade. If you ask me, Senator Dodd, which I consider has been the most important bipartisan and bicameral policy with Latin America from the U.S. in the last 15 years, I would say the free trade agreements with CAFTA, with the DR, with Colombia, Peru, Chile, you name it. And that has created stability, long-term investment, and has connected our regions. So I'm just going to give an example. Ecuador has looked for a trade agreement with the U.S. It knocked the doors a lot of time in Capitol Hill. They couldn't make it. They sat down with China, and they made it possible in 6 months. The U.S. has to become, again, a leader of those trading relations. The second critical point, and sorry, Paula, migration. Migration happens because there is a lack of democracy, a lack of security, a lack of opportunities, and a lack of investment. So why this is so critical? Because we need the U.S. helping more closely, not because it has not done it, but we need it more, General Richardson, and it's to have the U.S. protecting those things that are affecting democracy, investment, and economic stability. And last, investment. I've been in many panels where people ask me, are you worried about China participating in critical infrastructure bids in Latin America? And I say, we're open to all sorts of biddings, but we want to see more U.S. companies coming to participate in those strategic infrastructure bids. And that also connects to the idea that the best way to face the Belt and Road Initiative is to bring back the concept of nearshoring, alliance for progress, and allowing those three elements: trade, migration solution, and investment. I think that's critical for the region.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to beg the challenge here, Minister Bisonó, if you would, and also Secretary General Almagro, give us your very brief comment. What's most important from your vantage point? What's the solution here?
Muchas gracias de nuevo. Bueno, como decía el senador Dodd,
As Senator Dodd was saying, that is half Dominican also, if you didn't know.
Sí.
Yes.
Pues
I think seeing what we have ahead of us and what we can do with APEP and ADD and other programs shared by countries that share the idea of the liberty and democracy, because as President Duque was saying, democracy is at the basis of everything, because when people have a job, is busy, things work fine, things work, it goes better, and people feel better. Because you know how they say, money flees from where there is no peace or security, and that is why the Dominican Republic has foreign investment at the moment, and that is why we speak of the two Luises in the Americas, Luis Lacalle, Uruguay, Luis Lovina Verde in Dominican Republic. You were asking me about the elections in May 17. Please follow them. The president is gone in a first round with great numbers, because the people feel secure, at ease, and they have jobs, and they feel they can remain there, living there and working there. So now that we have Secretary Almagro here, is a moment not to be biased for next elections and preserve the work that Secretary Almagro is doing, so that we have an organization that represents the America, liberty and freedom, as you have been doing.
Deputy Secretary General Almagro, you get the last 30 seconds because we have a poll. And to close, please.
Peace, democracy, justice, diplomacy, security, climate change, rule of law. The concepts are all there. So it is about the effectiveness of our dialogue that should be based in real partnership, in true partnership. And let us remember that the quest for regional unity is not a destination, but a journey that requires patience, perseverance, and vision. That's it.
All right, perfect. Now we have a quick poll. I'm turning it over to Matt Swift for the poll.
Perfect. All right, we're going to start with the first poll. We've got 3 poll questions for all of you. I can see a number of people have already responded to the poll. The first one is, how would you assess the current level of cooperation between the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean? A, at its peak, demonstrating strong collaboration. B, optimistic with room for improvement. C, neutral with efforts to enhance cooperation ongoing. D, facing challenges. Or E, significantly lacking. And it looks like a lot of people are participating in this poll, but it looks like optimistic but with room for improvement, but facing challenges is a pretty close second. Very close second.
That seemed to, I think, reflect the comments of the panel, at least I think, in this case.
Yes, and we have some less optimistic people with significantly lacking. So, next question. In what ways can multilateral organizations contribute to fostering cooperation and dialogue between the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean nations? A, facilitating diplomatic negotiations. B, providing platforms for dialogue. C, monitoring regional developments. D, offering technical assistance. Or E, promoting democratic governance.
Looks like technical assistance is in the lead.
Yes, by quite a bit.
Secretary Almagro, there you go.
Yes. And then our last question. How can the United States better engage with Latin America and the Caribbean nations to address common challenges such as climate change, migration, and economic development? A, strengthening diplomatic ties. B, investing in regional infrastructure projects. C, promoting trade and investment agreements. D, enhancing cooperation on security issues. Or E, supporting democratic governance initiatives.
Investment in economics and trade.
By far, but mostly investing in regional infrastructure projects.
All right, well, fantastic. Please join me. This panel and discussion, starting with General Richardson, you're fantastic, and just would like to thank all the distinguished speakers here today. Please join me in thanking them.